doesn't.
Hi everybody, my name is Danny Williams, and today I'm going to do a speed sculpting demonstration for you for about an hour. Basically, if you have an idea and you want to try and execute that idea, I think ZBrush is a great way to do it. Pencil and paper is really fast, but you can cheat your views really easily. And here are some images that I've made in ZBrush, most of which are 100% done in ZBrush, like this one, where you just have kind of an idea, a concept, and in a few hours you can get to something that represents your idea, relatively well. So for me, style-wise, I try to jump around to a few different styles. I try not to be constrained to just one idea. So I'll, work on a creature one day and a character another day and kind of a humanoid another day. So, let's see what we make today. So I'm going to go ahead and hit start now on my my timer, and we'll see where we end up at about 50 minutes. So I really do like to treat ZBrush like a design tool. So I'm not exactly sure what I'm going to make. I have a rough idea, but just starting with a ball like this. Oops, sorry. Let's go over here. Let's do that. Starting with a ball like this, just want to see what it is that I can come up with in an hour. And my tool set is really not anything special. It's pretty simple. I have a few brushes I like to use to try to get my stuff done, and I try not to let the subject matter change my workflow too much. Obviously, if I'm working on something like hard surface, then I'll use maybe a different set of brushes. But overall, if it's organic, I try to think of it the same, whether it's a cartoon or something more realistic and kind of has a lot more gnarly detail. And for me, the foundation of all this stuff is really just drawing, right? So I love to draw more than I love to do anything else. And I think of ZBrush kind of like drawing, but in 3D, right? Not really so much sculpting. So for me, I can draw a relationship like this, like that lip, and then kind of come in, use the move brush to adjust the proportion and relationship of that lip to the rest of the model, right? Let's give him kind of a cheekbone, pull those brows out a little bit, and for me, this is, ZBrush is really well suited when you're working in a situation where you can make adjustments to the model and then have people make comments on the rough work in progress model. Oh, the chin's too big and it doesn't have to be totally finished, or the chin's too small. But if you do need to get something that looks relatively finished and presentable, I think you can do it faster in ZBrush than you can in just about any other way that I know of in 3D. So let's just kind of pull out some ears. I'll rotate these back a little bit. And then now I want to start taking advantage of Dynamesh. Dynamesh is a way to go ahead and give myself a little more resolution on the model, and things like the ears that are starting to get stretched out, or if I want to build up kind of like a neck, just start pulling a neck right out of this character, right out of the head. So the more I kind of pull on this model, the less dense the geometry that makes the model up is going to become, because I'm stretching it out. So we can see that represented here, or even better like that. So I have really small little boxes here and big boxes here. And basically what that means is at some point I won't have enough information to sculpt in any detail if I want to. So Dynamesh is a great way to handle that. I'm going to go up here, just go down to delete lower, and say Dynamesh, give this a low number. Oh, sorry. Let's go back. Give this a low number like that. Dynamesh the model, and then now I can kind of continue to work in whatever shape is there. So let's pull out the beginning of a torso as well. Gonna mask off part of this so I can protect what's up there and still work kind of bigger. Dynamesh, and now I can kind of pull this around. So at this stage, you know, again, depending on who you're working with, we're almost 5 minutes in, but we've got a rough silhouette blocked out, you know, that we'll probably adjust quite a bit. But if you're working with people who can see things rough, it's actually enough at this point to kind of sit down and say, hey, what do you think of this jawline? You know, you might get a note like the jawline needs to be more or less pronounced. So let's go ahead and adjust that. You know, and you can draw or sketch something out really quickly too, but here I'm getting 360 degrees worth of drawings, you know, in just that quickly, you know, to change that jawline. The other thing is there's something nice about all of the views being, all of the views corresponding. So for example, if I want to start sculpting into this piece now and just kind of defining a nose, and let's pull this out. Add a little more volume to his cranium. Let's make an adjustment to his eye sockets, and then I'll add some eyes to him in a second. And then let's go grab the move brush. Change the shape a bit. So I'm constantly trying to look at the silhouette to see how I can adjust it, you know, from multiple angles. Can I take this head and say, change the angle? And let's Dynamesh him again, but go down to a lower number. Adjust this shape. And let's say we'll do something like this. Going to give him horns, decided not to. So for me, again, I like drawing on the surface like this, and it allows me to check relationships really quickly and just see if I like the shape of things. The shape that they're taking. And then if I do, I can keep it. If I don't, I can make adjustments. And time-wise, it's not a big investment at all. So let's do this to grab those ears. Let's go like this.
Alrighty, guys, we got some more demonstrations happening. At the CTN Live stage, we got Dynamesh demonstration. We're now expanding stage 10. Justin Copeland, storyboard.
Alright, so just like with physical play, I want to try and get some plane changes in here, so I can go ahead and just quickly block out a couple of plane changes. And now, let's go ahead and add a column to the neck. A break in the trapezius. Real indication of the clavicle. So we're about 9 minutes and 50 seconds in. From the start of the sculpt. Let's see. I'm going to go ahead and I made a copy of the initial ball that I started with. I'm just going to take it and move it. Also, if you're a ZBrush user, you'll notice that my user interface is not the standard user interface. I have some custom tools that I like to use. Those are the holes in the UI here. If you like, you can download the UI from my website. And I'm going to remirror that eyeball. There we go. And now I can kind of start to build up the eye socket around the eyeball. So the eyeball's there. Let's start to build the structure to go around it. So cheekbone. And now for the eyeballs, for a concept piece like this, I'll just go ahead and just smush this material right in to make a lid. And I'll clean up the lid later, but for now I can kind of judge size and placement for the lid. Shapes a little bit better. So for me, this is the part of ZBrush that I like the most, because essentially you can go ahead and, we had a whole different lip and jawline, 2 minutes ago, and it's very easy to accommodate and make changes. If you were using kind of a more traditional 3D package, changes like that, especially if you already have topology on the model, can be a little devastating, and they can set you back and take a little time to make the change. So it's one of the things I really like about the kind of digital sculpting paradigm. I'm just trying to find an interesting shape for this nose. One other nice thing is ZBrush has up to 10,000 undos per subtool, so each subtool you have the ability to change up to 10,000 times. So I can make it change here in the face and never affect the eyeballs and vice versa. So it's a very unique feature that I like a lot about ZBrush. So let's divide this guy again. And he's got most of his landmarks in here. So what I'll do is I'll put in a deep gouge there. I'll pick it up here. I'll pick up the bottom lip. Put a deep gouge in the chin there. A deep gouge inside the ear. Like so. I'll put a gouge around the nostril and through the nasolabial fold, like so. And most importantly, try to get a shape around the eyelids, like so, and then maybe do that as well. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use ZBrush, right? So when I look at my geometry, it doesn't follow the flow of the shapes of the models at all. But if I go and say geometry, I could probably, no, let's do that. If I do that, I can go ZBrush. I'll tell it to give me 4,000 polygons. Hit the button, and it's going to take a second, but when that black line gets over here, I should have topology that follows the shapes that I gouged out. You can also use, there's a brush called ZBrush Curves. You can use ZBrush Curves to direct the flow of the resulting topology. But here, this has something that's going to follow that shape a lot better. And if I divide this a few times, we haven't lost any detail because I haven't put any in yet, but now my sculpting is going to follow what I added. So let's go ahead and do this. And what you find when you work this way is with ZBrush, you don't need as many polygons to represent very simple things in your model. So let's go ahead and pull this back a little bit. And let's pull this guy out a bit. Push this in a bit. And now I'm at a point where I can really start sculpting on the model. So basically I've kind of made a base mesh and now I'm ready to start sculpting. So let's turn this down a little bit. And for me, a big part of that process is defining planes on the model. So there on the nose, I'm kind of defining one plane. In the lid, I'm going to constantly keep updating that lid because as I change the shapes around it, the lid is going to need to change to correspond. In the brow, I'm going to want to change some stuff. So we're at about 18 minutes in. And just really quickly, I'm going to start to look at either side of those planes. So here on the brow, I want to push that back a little bit on either side of that plane change. So here I can kind of come up, and then here I can add a plane that goes that way. And then for the nose, soften that up, clean that up there. Now, depending on the style that you're working in, you may want to keep things smooth like this. Something I like to experiment a lot with in my work is taking what looks like kind of a smoother, cartoonier silhouette and then trying to add a little internal detail to it that you wouldn't expect to see in something so cartoony. So I like to experiment with that, and I'll do a little of that just to start adding a little detail to this face. So let's look at stuff like, say, the forehead or around the eyelids. Let's say I take this. Divide this guy one more time. I try to keep an eye on how many polys I have. If I'm up in the millions of polys this early, generally I consider that to be a failure. I need to be able to get most of my shapes in under a million. And I'll switch up my material as well. Let's go ahead and add some planes to the lips. So inside here, let's get at these lids. So I'm going to try to add detail that corresponds to the way that the muscles on the face would be likely to move. So we're at about 22 minutes right now. All right, so now the real beauty of all this is I've started to add a little bit of detail. If I have a conversation with a production designer, art director, or someone, and they say, hey, you know what? I like the way the detail is laid in, but I don't like some of the shapes, and they want to go back to the drawing board with a big shape change. It's literally as simple as dropping down to a lower resolution. It's one of the other nice aspects of ZBrush. And at the lower resolution, you can make whatever shape changes you want. So let's go ahead and really change this guy. Let's take, let's preserve his eyes. So I'll mask that area off. And let's go ahead and change up his nose. And let's change up his brows. His cheekbones, let's make them really kind of evil. Let's make that chin a little pointier, and later on maybe we'll add a little goatee. And then those horns I was thinking about adding earlier, let's go ahead and add those. Let's make them demonic. Maybe I want to pitch them forward a little bit. So undo that. And then do this. And there's a number of ways to generate geometry in ZBrush. You can use something called Z-spheres if you're not familiar with that. You can use any of the insert brushes. So they allow you to insert a mesh. So let's go ahead and try this. Let's say we take this. So, and we want to add some horns to them. So I'm going to go up in resolution here. I'm going to say geometry delete lower, right? And then I'm going to go ahead and use the curve tube brush. So I'm going to come over here, hit C, go to curve tube, so B then C, and I can go ahead and start to draw out a couple of horns. And let's rotate these out. And I'll try to, let's say we go split, and I'm going to go split mask points, because when you insert these, it adds those horns. So I'm going to say split mask points, and then now I have the horns as their own separate tool here, and I can start to adjust them. So I'm going to turn on my symmetry to take advantage of that, and hold shift just to scale down so just smooth out the edge of the horns, and they're so low resolution that they'll actually start to pinch to a point. And then now I can try to find a better angle, so I don't put pressure on myself to get it exactly right at the beginning. So I can kind of scale them down, scale them up, rotate them, try to find a good angle, throw an extra shape into them. So maybe if I go down here, do something like that, go back over here, and now I can start to work in a flange for where they'll come out. Actually, I'll move them a little bit, looking at the other shapes in his head. Alright, and now just go back with my clay buildup, and since this thing came from quads, I can go ahead now. I froze the subdivision levels or deleted them, but I can hit reconstruct subdiv, and it's going to give me my low resolution again, which is really nice because I can go ahead and make big broad adjustments, like if I want to pull this horn out or give this horn a little flange to come out of from his head, I can start to adjust the shape of the cranium a little bit and try to do something that makes sense. You know, so we're at 27 minutes in, and we're able to adjust to a lot of change. So let's go ahead and take his body and change the pitch of it a bit. And then let's take his neck area. Oh, let's mask off this to protect it. And let's take his neck area. Kind of change up some of these shapes. Alright, so now let's go ahead and start to again sculpt in some of these shapes. So the brow, maybe I'm going to add a little more mass to the brow. Maybe separate out some of the shapes in the forehead. And this is one of the really nice things. You'll notice that, alright, so we have like those indications of the beginnings of a wrinkle there. If I go down in resolution to where I no longer can see those shapes, and I start adding a little material, like so, and then smooth it out, add a little material here, smooth it out, then I can go back up, and we still have our detail, and it follows that shape, right? So it's kind of a nice way to think about it. So I can go back down, smooth out the shapes in that neck, get my clavicle and my sternum in. Those are my bony forms, and everything's going to attach to them, right? So try to put in the loose indication of something like a pectoral. To accommodate for this big wavy neck, we're going to have to think about how certain musculature would work, like the sternocleidomastoid might come up like that and still connect down in here to the sternoclavicular notch, but the trap is probably going to be really bent up. So the acromion process, that little bump there, and then the trap. still come back and kind of define my planes a little cleaner. So right now we're at 30 minutes in, and we've kind of totally changed this guy. So in the context of a work situation, I think it's important to be able to do that, because a lot of the times the changes won't come from you, and you'll have to accommodate for the requests of others. So let's take these horns now. I'm going to divide them a little bit, but add a little volume to them. Oh, too big on that brush. I can see I adjusted the eyes as well. So let's go back down a little bit. If you hold down Alt with the move brush, it'll move on the normal of the object, so meaning it'll pull straight in or straight out from wherever those points are facing. And at this stage, I've got some stuff represented that I could probably take to a creative type and start asking questions. But I'm going to go ahead and just cut the model, or use this clip brush, which is going to force those polygons into a tight little seam. And then what this is going to allow me to do is to have a relatively clean looking thing. So I can continue to add detail, but before I do, I actually want to start thinking about color. And this is one of the things that I really like about ZBrush. With color information, it takes the kind of exploration to a new level, right? If I was working with physical clay, depending on the kind of clay and how much time I have, I wouldn't be able to color the thing. Me personally, there's other people who maybe would. I certainly wouldn't be able to do it. It's like 32 minutes in. Let's go ahead and put in a base color on this model. So I'm just going to go ahead and let's go fill object. So we filled an object. We fill the object with that. I'm going to grab the eyes. I'm actually just going to fill the eyes with black. Let's go ahead and grab this guy. So you can apply a number of effects to your brush, whether you're sculpting or painting. I'm going to take this rough alpha, and then I'm going to take something called color spray. Color spray is going to allow me to get a slight variation in whatever color I choose to make it a little darker or a little lighter. And there's also things you can do, like when I pull down shift to smooth, if I do this now, it's going to change the actual shape of the geometry. But if I hold down shift and turn off Z add, it's going to allow me to keep the geometry but only change the color information. So I'm going to go ahead and just kind of pick out some areas and make them a little darker. And then I can kind of smooth into them a little bit. And in this early stage, I try not to be so cautious, because I'm going to do something later on that's going to unify this color a bit. So I started with this kind of red, which is kind of what you would expect for, you know, a character like this, like a demon. But I'm going to go ahead and try to there we go. But I'm going to go ahead and try to do something a little less expected eventually, and maybe our demon will be kind of like purplish or something like that. So I'm just kind of picking up some surfaces with color and pushing back other surfaces with color. And then at the end, I'm going to go ahead and say, okay, let's unify this whole thing by picking something like this purple and turning this RGB intensity down. And let's just go fill object, fill object, fill object, fill object. And you see it's using, oh, sorry, I need to switch colors again. There we go. So if I say fill object, fill object, fill object, it's using that 22%, and it kind of unifies the color a little bit, right? So you can experiment with color in a lot of cool ways. Let's go down to here now. Oops, sorry, let's go black, say fill. And then let's go up here. Choose some third color. There we go. fill object for the horns. And then for the eyes, make the eyes black. So now I can continue to paint, or I can hold shift and hit that button, hit the little icon here, and that's going to allow me to work without the paint. So I can take, you know, and see what I can do with the sculpting. But the nice thing is I can sculpt and paint at the same time. So now if I want to start adding detail, let's take this darker purple. So I'm just going to color pick that by holding C and go a little darker with it and say, okay, well, I'm going to want to reinforce some of these wrinkles and add new wrinkles. So I'm going to come in here, but you'll notice I'm not only carving into the surface, but I'm also painting while I carve into the surface. So you're getting both. You can do both. And I can smooth out only the painted part because I still have RGB turned off on my smooth brush, right? So this is a quick way to go ahead and get a lot of free two-dimensional detail. You know, for the eyes are dark, so I'm going to want them to stand out a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and add a lighter color here, and then smooth, maybe even drop down a bit and smooth. And then I'm going to color pick into that lighter color so it becomes part of that purple. Oh, sorry. Let's go over here. Now that'll help just pop the eyes a little bit. If it was the other way and the eyes were a little more light, then I would go dark around the eyes. Alright, so now let's go ahead and so we're at 38 minutes right now. And really quickly, there's something I want to try and add here. I'm not sure I'll have time to do it, but we'll see. So I'm going to go ahead and paint a mask here. And I'm going to use something called FiberMesh. FiberMesh is ZBrush's internal hair system. So if I go down to here to FiberMesh, I'm going to say preview, and it shows me a rough preview of what the hair could look like. But if I go to modifiers, I can make adjustments. So give me less hairs, adjust their length, you know, whatever. I can also say give me lightbox fibers. Lightbox is ZBrush's way to look at kind of predefined things or things that you've saved before. So I'll pick out one of these, and let's pick out one that we wouldn't expect. So let's say like this grass, right? I can do that, and if I look, I've got information for the base color. So let's make the base color that dark purple, and then information for the tip color. Let's make the tip color much lighter, but also still in that kind of purple family like that. I'm going to say hide. I can adjust the gravity, I can adjust the twist. There's all these options that I can adjust. I'm going to turn the length down a little bit. And I'm going to do a quick render just to see what that looks like. And you can see that when you render it, you get something that looks a lot more like hair. There's groom brushes that you can use specifically for this stuff. So if I go into the brush menu and hit G, I've got things like groom hair strong, groom color tips, so you can adjust the color of the brush. But you can also just use the regular move brushes with them, and the smooth brushes and the clip brushes. So these are regular polygons. Oh, sorry. So I'm going to say accept, and it's going to give me those as a new object here. And I can start to modify that object. Like so. So let's see what that looks like rendered, you know, and there we've got like some quick hair. So if you decide, you know what, I really don't like any of the color information, which in this case I don't, I can go ahead and get rid of it and just kind of work with the model still, you know, and just kind of tackle the color again later. So we're at 41 minutes right now from a ball. And let's grab these ears, kind of move them a little bit. Give him kind of more stereotypical kind of demon ears. Then we can use the inflate brush right along the lobe. And then we can kind of gouge out the inside of the ear a little bit. So now I'm just going around looking at where I can pick up or push back the surface to try to make the shape more or less, the way I'm seeing it in my head. And I'm constantly just looking to make adjustments, and I think for me, that's the way I understand making art. For a long time, I was just kind of paralyzed, and I would sit there going, oh, I got to make it perfect, and I would overthink things. And nowadays, I try to just make a mark and then trust myself to judge the mark and try to figure out a way to make it better in the time that I have. So that's kind of the way that I try to think about this stuff. And ZBrush is really good for that kind of thinking, I think, because you can see a shape there. I just saw that shape in the neck. I want to add a little contrast to the jawline, relative to the neck. And I'm able to go ahead and do that really quickly. So if you see something, you can make the adjustment, as fast as you can think about it pretty much. And again, brush-wise, I've used maybe 4 or 5 different brushes, so again, my workflow is not as complicated as a lot of other workflows, but it does what I need it to do. Let's go in with some let's divide this guy one more time. Oh, sorry, going up in divisions. So he would move his neck a lot, so we can go ahead and do that. So we're at exactly 45 minutes right now. Go into the eyes really quickly. Going to turn down the focal shift, turn on symmetry. Just add in a little sculptural detail so the eyes don't look totally dead. You know which way he's looking. And then where where I've added some of those wrinkles probably as a final thing. I'll go ahead and start to try to pick up both sides of the wrinkle. You know, the wrinkle is the result of two convex forms coming together. It's never really a dig in, even though the dig in is the easy part. So I want to go ahead and make sure I add information to either side of the wrinkle. You know, so for me, if I come into work in the morning and am tasked with doing something, and I can sit there and do a bunch of sketches of something, and a lot of times I do, but if you have the ability to also do this, you know, and say, hey, what do you think of this in the round? A lot of times, A, it's impressive to who you're working with, but B, the more important thing is if they have big changes and strong opinions, we've spent, you know, less than an hour to get here. When they say, hey, I don't want the nose to have that big bump in it, can we get rid of it? You know, you can make the change. You can keep the detail you have while making that change. Oops, sorry, wrong brush. You know, so you can make whatever shape change you want, but the fact that you can go like this and turn it, you know, you can have a conversation about, well, how far out do the nostrils flare relative to the nose, you know? How far back does the bridge of the nose go? How far up is the highest point of the nose? The fact that you can have all those conversations is really, really great this early on in the process. And then I think Dominic mentioned this brush in his amazing talk earlier, but the form brush, I like to use this a lot. It will keep whatever detail you have. So in this case, I don't have a lot of detail on these horns, but I just want to go ahead and turn them a little bit in space. So let's say we do something like that. Like that. So let's just use this guy. So let's go ahead and sculpt in. So this is one of the brushes I've been using this whole process, Damien Standard. And what I like is I can go in and pick up the surface or push the surface in. But now, if I decide that I want to change some of those underlying shapes, that form brush is going to preserve all of the sculpting that I did. And I don't know another way to do this in CG or practical. So this is actually a really nice kind of hidden gem in ZBrush. So if I go ahead and say add those shapes like that, and I decide I want to add more or less of the kind of big structural shapes, I can do it, and you see how it preserves what's under there? So you can play with whatever shapes you want. I'll undo that. And then last thing, let's take this light, adjust it a bit, and in the rendering tab, there's something called BPR filters. And actually, I'll zoom in a little bit. I'm going to turn on perspective, and I'm going to turn on the floor. And in the rendering tab, there's information for the shadows, how stark you want them. So I'm just going to make the shadow about 40% visible, and I'm going to render. BPR filters are great because they work on top of your rendered image, right? So now I can go ahead and click this, and I can say, hey, you know what? Let's sharpen the whole thing up. And I can see what that looks like if I turn the filter on or off. You could do the same filter over and over again, so let's do a few sharpens just so we can see what it looks like. All right, so that's 3 passes of sharpen. If I turn them all off, we can see that it gets a lot softer. So it just adds a nice little kick of contrast to turn all these on. And then let's go over here, and there's this filter called Orton, which makes everything brighter. But all of the filters, something that's really nice about them is that you can confine them. So I can say only work in the shadow, and I turn that up. The rest of the image goes back down, and the shadow only gets lighter, right? Which is kind of nice. I can say colorize, and let's choose a cooler color, so maybe something like this blue, and do the same thing. Let's confine it to the shadow. And now I've got a different temperature for the shadow, since the shader I'm using is kind of pinkish, right? So you can change that up. If I go back and change something like the shadow, it would have to be recalculated. So let's make it a little bit softer. Let's make the angle 4, and let's make the blur 8. I don't know. I usually just do this by eye, and so I'll just start there and see what it does. You see it gets a little bit slower. All right, but now the shadow kind of diffuses towards the end and gets a little softer when it gets further away from the object. If you want, at the end of this process, you want to send this off to get looked at for approvals or whatever, you can go ahead and say movie, document, so you don't get the whole window, because your boss or whoever won't care about that, and just say turntable, and it's going to use the values that are already propagated down here, or you can change them to change the number of images. You just say turntable, and it takes your render settings and just starts giving you a turntable with those render settings. So no fuss, no muss, super fast. We're at 53 minutes. I'm gonna stop now because I think my time is up. But from a ball, to something that you can have a discussion about in an hour, I don't know another way to do it in 3D. And I've used Maya for a long time. I've used Mudbox for a long time. The mesh generation in ZBrush is the best. It's, just testing out. And I just think it's a great package. It's my favorite thing to play around with. So that's all I got. Yeah.